Dave and I share many of the same qualities, such as our luscious cowlicks of Michael Landon hair and our love of dogs, namely Snoop Dogg and Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Snoop Dogg.
Seriously though, no one is more attuned to the sensibilities of a dog than David. Well, perhaps with the exception of Michael Vick.
Only this side of the room is laughing.
For their first date, David took Andrew to a California Raisins reunion concert. He didn't actually have tickets to eat, so he told her to buy some from a scalper. After the show, they were hungry. David told Andrew that he knew a place that serves great soul food. When they arrived at Esso 20 minutes later, they went inside to grab a bite. David boasted about how he used to work there as a tuxedo-dressed washer attendant. And he showed her his retired cummerbund hanging from the ceiling. Chest still flared and all impressed with himself. David went up to the clerk, asked for some 3-day-old sandwiches, and surprised Andrea with the bill. Food in hand and a smug smile of satisfaction on his face, they exited the store and headed to the car to eat. As David scarfed down his peanut butter and onion hoagie while talking to Andrea at close range with his mouth wide open, it brought to mind her favorite movie, Waiting to Exhale.
Very funny.
This side of the room is the only people laughing. This side of the room is the only people laughing. Wait, the peanut butter thing is an inside joke.
Andrea quipped, Have you ever considered stage acting in a Shakespeare production? Might I suggest Macbeth? On the topic of food, David never lifts a finger to make a meal. That's because he uses his feet. He puts the toe in tofu. David is a wizard of a chef and a master of Viking cuisine. Some of his best specialties include gourmet toast crusts, tarantula eyeball caviar, chocolate boiled eel tongues, and don't even get me started on his garlic horseradish pudding. The latter is a staple of Tom Brady's diet, which he has personally cited as the secret difference maker in his most recent Super Bowl victories. For his culinary and innovation prowess, David was featured on the cover of Time magazine. That's THYME. He once told me that he prefers his eggs the same way he likes John Lennon and the Beatles, without Yoko. Last year, David was voted sexiest ex-produce clerk alive. When asked to comment, he said, "That's insane in the romaine."
Insane in the romaine.
As for our lovely bride, Andrea, I must say that you look exquisitely beautiful today. You've always been so exceptionally generous, kind, and sweet to our family. We love you very much. You are a testament to the incredible job that your parents have done in raising you to be a woman of such great integrity. I also want to extend my deepest sympathies to you for agreeing to take on the most ridiculous last name in the Western Hemisphere. If you had any sense, that should have been a deal breaker. Speaking of deals, David is quite the entrepreneur. Recently, he was on a celebrity edition of Shark Tank, pitching some of his products. These included carrion-flavored chapstick, horseradish nasal spray, bacon grease facial exfoliator, steel wool underwear, and lastly, David and Penn Gillette promoted their 7-bladed shaving razor made from harvested toenails.
Oh.
When guest shark Sean Connery saw this, he said in his unique Scottish accent, "That's chic."
They said chick?
Schick. It's a brand of razors.
Our family's
I know
been
it-
blessed
I
to
know
go
it
on so many amazing vacations. One of the most memorable events that Dave and I shared on our travels was climbing to the summit of a Scottish foothill. Being in Britain, it was fitting that on that day, half the mountain was engulfed in a fog that was thicker than Eugene Levy's eyebrows dipped in hollandaise. All this traveling has left David disenchanted though. He once told me that he longed to live in a faraway land. Like Brad Pitt, he wanted to spend 7 years in Quebec. Dave and I once visited an Eskimo village in the Canadian North. The locals were cutting up fresh whale blubber to eat for supper. One of them asked David how much he wanted. He replied, "None of it."
Isn't that like a
He could be a little insensitive at times. For instance, while visiting a remote tribe, he once conducted a musical ensemble of pygmies by waving a Swiss Army knife toothpick. David once interviewed a train conductor and asked him the reason for why he chose that profession. The man replied by stating that he wanted to continue in the family tradition set by his father and grandfather. David wrote in his notes, "That's a locomotive." Dave, I know that you helped get me out of many jams. And my question is to you, could you get me out of a marmalade? You're always there when I need you. The day that Stephen Boger can't help his brother is the day that I've got something better to do. I wouldn't hesitate to take a pebble for you. That's how much I respect you. No, seriously. I'd walk into an inferno for you. A disco inferno. Dave, if we ever had to go to war, there was no other ninja that I'd rather have by my side to hold my canteen. David likes to experiment with facial hair. Inspired by the 80s TV show Magnum P.I., he once tried to pull off a mustache, but he wasn't able to sell it. David is a simple man who enjoys the small pleasures in life, such as the majestic colors of a sunset, dew glistening on a newly formed leaf, the sweet smell of saliva on his upper lip from an afternoon nail cutting session.
ice cream.
A few little-known facts about David. He turned the literary world upside down with his accidental game-changing discovery of the half syllable, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. He's also a bona fide philosopher, always seeking to ascertain answers to life's most mystifying and profound questions. This inquisitiveness led him to writing his dissertation on why black socks produce more lint than white ones. David likes to read the classics. Some of his favorites include Where's Waldo, vintage TV guides, and fortune cookie scraps. He's a responsible outdoorsman that always gives back to nature by disposing of his plastic water bottles in the first lake, river, or stream that he encounters. He once logged an ancient forest for sport, decimating a delicate endangered ecosystem. David Suzuki vigorously condemned him, to which Dave replied, "People always complain out of ignorance. It's the nature of things."
It's David Suzuki show.
David has been inducted into the Guinness Book of World Records on multiple occasions. He's the only person to climb the Scarborough Bluffs doing backwards cartwheels. He's the first person to swim across Lake Ontario underwater on a single breath. A feat all the more remarkable that, considering that when he began training, he couldn't even make it from one side of the bath to the other. David never shies away from irony. He was once trampled in a pig pen on Groundhog Day. While hunting for moose one time, he accidentally shot Mark Messier.
It's his nickname.
Many of you know that David used to be a professional MMA fighter. Evander Holyfield saw one of his fights and ended up befriending him. In Holyfield's book, Biting Off More Than You Can Chew, he said that David was always there to lend an ear when you need one. Prosthetic one, that is. Speaking of which, David could be a little hard of hearing sometimes. He thought Dr. Seuss was the Greek god of medicine. David was commissioned to do carpentry work at Sean Connery's Scottish Castle. David asked him, "What can I do for you?" Sean replied, "I need help with my shelf." David said, "You should have called Tony Robbins." David is really good looking. One time he was at a Hollywood party full of 80s film stars. A group of women pointed and said, "Who's the fly guy?" As Jeff Goldblum crouched and shielded his face in shame. Always one to look after his appearance, David once got his teeth bleached. When asked how he wanted them, he showed the dentist a photo of Paul Bearer's face. David has a propensity for living life on the edge. This includes reckless incidents of falling asleep in the bath without drowning. Like a greasy chiropractor and a nimble proctologist, he narrowly slips through the cracks.
Oh.
Speaking of which, he failed his oral proctology exam because he couldn't remember the lyrics to Hokey Pokey. By the way, Dave, this is a one-shot deal. I won't be speaking at your next weddings when you convert to Mormonism. Sorry if I let the cat out of the bag, Andrew. I assume this is the way you wanted to find out. David is a consummate cyclist. He started out with 2 training wheels and worked his way up to 4. Inspired by his love of feet and Star Wars, David wanted to move to Germany, become a podiatrist, and change his name to Hans Tolo. David once met famed atheist Richard Dawkins after a theological debate. He said Dawkins told him, and I quote, "I could never understand it, no matter how many times I've listened to REM's Losing My Religion." David once debated an atheist about the existence of God. In defense of his position, David pointed to a projection screen with a photo of Texas beef on it, looked to the audience and said with a smile of satisfaction, "I rest my case. Are we done here?" David can be a little slow sometimes. Let me list a few dozen examples. Mostly one-liners. He thought that Joaquin Phoenix was a war in the cardboard from Arizona. David thought that ranch dressing was an item in a farmer's first aid kit. One time, David and I entered a Rastafarian pharmacy. The clerk said to him, "Yo, bumbaclap," to which David turned to me and said, "How does he know I need a laxative?" The clerk overheard this and gave David a copy of Cool Runnings. When Andrew asked David if he wanted to go to Greece for their honeymoon, he said, "There are better John Travolta movies." David thought Aphrodisiac was a 70s erotic Bill Cosby film. He thought Dog Day Afternoon was a TV marathon of Dog the Bounty Hunter. He thought Mariana's Trench was a coat for female detectives. He He thought Marilyn Monroe was Mr. Dressup's ex-wife. To prepare for his audition for the lead role in Boogie Nights, David spent 40 nights in the desert without his handkerchief. He thought 007 Goldfinger was a hotline for people suffering from nasal congestion.
Look at the fire.
I asked him what his favorite Kevin Spacey film was. He said in a pretentious voice, "That's La Confidential."
Mom, how long is this?
I asked him who his favorite movie star was. He said either Hugh Jackman or Gene Jackman. He thought A Beautiful Mind was a New York Times bestseller about Charlie Sheen. He once told me in a casual voice that her dad's maiden name was Ron Chalant. I told Dave I was hurt by eavesdropping. He asked if I had the scars to prove it. David thought Donald Trump's impeachment was a left-wing attack on his complexion. David thought A Clockwork Orange was a Democrat ticker counting down the possible days until Trump was out of office. He thought Weekend at Bernie's was a story of a protester who got beat up by the aging politician on the street. We once went into a rock climb. I tried to show David the ropes, but he said he didn't need them. He was convinced that Meals on Wheels was an episode of Degrassi Junior High. I asked Dave if he was into organic eating. He said he preferred pianos. I asked him if he was pro-choice. He said, yes, I like PC products. He thought Mississippi was the woman who invented the plastic straw. He told me his favorite story is Paul's Guardian, about the foot injury that the apostles sustained on the road to Damascus. I heard through the grapevine that David thought CCR stood for Cassius Clay Revisited. He thought the Led Zeppelin song When the Levee Breaks was about a time that Eugene Levy was interrogated by the RCMP. He has a real green thumb. He wanted to start a gardening show featuring classic rock stars so he could watch Robert Plant while Roger Waters. When asked to give a concise analysis of Ben-Hur, he said, gender non-conforming. I asked him what his favorite song lyrics were. He said, hey, Mr. Tangerine Man, peel a rind for me. He thought REO Speedwagon was a short
Pacific.
He thought the X-Files were the restraining orders on Clint Eastwood's former wives. I asked him if he knew the Heimlich maneuver. He thought I was referring to a malpractice case involving a German doctor. He once made pancakes with Tom Cruise in the dark over a fire pit. He told me it was risky biscuit. When the CP24 reporter asked him about a possible design change to Canada's nickel, David said, leave it to Beaver. David thought the Hardy Boys were the brothers who invented Viagra, and that Die Hard was a documentary about one of them fatally succumbing to the drug. David told me that RuPaul had delusions of grandeur for wanting his own do-rag race. He once spent thousands of dollars on kazoo lessons and said, I don't regret it one bit. It's the best investment that I've ever made. I can play virtually anything. David was once interviewed to be a police officer. He handed the interviewer his resume, which made reference to his grocery days, with the job description listed as professional stalker. but he mistakenly spelled stalker Stalker. He was booked on the spot with the yellow pages, that is. We were once watching a Raptors game. Drake appeared on the screen wearing lots of ostentatious jewelry. I said, "Look at all that fool's gold." David replied, "I don't know, I'm pretty sure it's real." I asked if he had to be stranded in the jungle with any living person. Who would it be? He said, "That's easy. Mick Jaguar." Last two here. He thought the pager was about Colin Kaepernick's devotion to the anthem. Lastly, he thought Ron Burgundy was the distinct color of red that her dad's face turns when criticizing sports players. Now I want to close with a few genuine stories. I always had a strong feeling that today was inevitable, but that was cemented last year during Canada Day weekend when we had Andrea up to our cottage for the first time. You must recall the boat ride that we took. There's one highlight from that day that is etched in my brain though. As we slowly drifted in Wolf Bay, you and David were sitting on the boat's tail end with me behind you guys. We were facing the majestic rocky cliffs that jutted up from the tree line in the bay. As you guys sat together with your heads tilted upward, the late afternoon sun was shining on your backs, bathing you in its glory. It was one of those ephemeral moments where the veil between heaven and earth is pulled back, and God gives us a glimpse into the beauty of His domain. At that moment, I knew that you two would be together forever. Despite all the silliness that I shared this evening, David has many redeeming qualities. Dave, you are the funniest person I've ever known. You are a true comic genius and the most rhythmic white dancer with a beard that this world has ever known. I wouldn't be half the comedian now without your inspiration or sharing love with the same actors and movies. To me, you will always be the man, the myth, the legend. To counterbalance David's funniness, David has an exceptionally compassionate heart, often putting the welfare of others before his own. Those who know David well are aware that he is very generous, perhaps to a fault. There's one brief story that I'd like to share which I think encapsulates David's selfless spirit. David and I attended a Leafs game a few years ago. We spent virtually the whole game engrossed in a theological discussion, barely even paying attention to the game, but I digress. I would be remiss to mention that it was a blustery, frigid winter night. It must have been around -20 with the wind chill.
No thanks.
It was one of those teeth-chattering nights that felt as cold as death and made you thankful to have a warm place to sleep. As we exited the arena, basically everyone, including myself, instinctively began to run for shelter and our parked cars. The only thing that crossed through our minds was to get out of the cold as fast as possible. I made it about 100 feet from the arena and noticed that David was no longer by my side. I began scanning the area, wondering whether he was playing a trick on me. All the while, I was shivering with great intensity and annoyance. After about 10 seconds, I spotted David among the scattered crowd of pedestrians. He was just steps outside of the arena and knelt down on the ground with his hand on a homeless person, whom I think I remember passing as I left the building. My heart was both lifted with joy but also sunken with guilt. Suddenly, my cold, aching body seemed frivolous. Out of the dozens of people that came and went, David was the only one to truly notice this person, stop in his tracks, and trivialize his own physical comfort in order to empathize and join with them in their suffering. What he did in that brief moment was give them the dignity and respect they deserved. God bless you, Dave, for what you did for that person. It was an important reminder to me to put the best interests of others before my own. In that moment, I saw Christ in you. You embodied the parable of Matthew 25:40, which Mom always cites. The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." To God be the glory, but Mom and Dad also deserve credit for giving us change as children to give the homeless people that we passed on the street. They instilled us with a charitable attitude for which we can be thankful. In closing, I want to welcome Andrew to her family. You are one of the most considerate, generous, and selfless people that I've ever met. You have a radiant beauty and tangible presence that is immediately felt whenever you enter a room. You have bestowed such loving kindness on us all, and we are delighted to call you one of our own. Please take care of my brother and make sure he doesn't fall asleep in the bath anymore. Finally, everyone, please raise your glasses and monocles as we toast Andrew the Gray and David the Groom. You have a life of sheer ecstasy together, and may your shared faith in God be your sources of meaning, purpose, and strength, which binds you together as you traverse the peaks and valleys that await you. As C.S. Lewis wrote in his book, The Four Loves, do not let your happiness depend on something you may lose. If love is to be a blessing and not a misery, it must be for the only beloved who will never pass away. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, and please forgive my brevity. God bless David and Andrew, and God bless you all. Cheers.
All right. Woo!